Stephen Malanga is a City Journal senior editor, Manhattan Institute senior fellow, writes for RealClearMarkets.com.
Well, good for him.
He's also got a book out, Shakedown, the continuing conspiracy against the American taxpayer.
Oof.
In the wake of that GAO report saying that there's, 80 different programs doing the same thing in the federal government.
And the whole union, the public employee unions and all that sort of stuff, too.
Exactly. I think his book is well-timed. We'll talk to Stephen in moments.
Yeah, that's coming up next. You're listening to the Armstrong and Getty Show. If you have the feeling as a taxpayer that you're constantly being screwed at every turn, a book has come along at the right time, perhaps.
I think so. Stephen Malanga, City Journal senior editor, Manhattan Institute senior fellow, RealClearMarkets.com columnist and author, and semi-frequent guest on the Armstrong and Getty Show joins us. Stephen, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. The new book is Shakedown, the continuing conspiracy against the American taxpayer. True or false? And feel free to embarrass me if you like. We have been saying for quite some time, quite chillingly, the largest, most important constituency for the government right now, certainly the most important one, is the government itself.
Well, that's actually a very profound statement, so I'm not going to embarrass you. It's actually the basis of what's known as public choice economics, which is basically what this recognized a long time ago, is that, even when the founders talked about how we have, what we wanted was kind of a clash of different interests in America, and they always, they sort of envisioned that to be like taxpayers versus, agriculturalists versus urbanists and all these different constituencies. What people didn't realize is that government over time, as it grew larger, became a constituency itself, constituency to protect itself. And what I say in this book, because the opening couple of chapters are kind of historical, is that all of this really took off during the 1960s with the war on poverty on the one hand, and also with the increasing spread of public sector unionization, where public sector workers were able to organize and became one of those constituencies for bigger government. And I just got done writing a piece for the Wall Street Journal last week in which I said that public sector unions are now the biggest advocates for tax increases around the country. And I sort of went around the country and looked at all the initiatives they sponsor and all the money they spend on these campaigns, because it's always in their interest to have bigger government. So what you say has always been somewhat true, but it's especially true in the modern era.
Just now, I saw this graph on MSNBC the other day. There are more government union people than private,
yes,
non-government union people for the first time ever.
Yes, that's been a trend. That's been a trend that's been really going on.
Right, that graph has been going that way, but it finally passed. But there are more government unions.
Finally passed. And here's the crucial thing about that: people don't understand the way that has changed the union movement in America. Because as I've said this quite a bit, if you go back to like the 60s and the 70s, the union movement was obviously pro-worker, and they were looking for pro-growth policies that focused on blue-collar workers, but they were also people who, for instance, pushed pro-growth policies. I mean, George Meany went to the White House in 1962 to lobby President Kennedy for tax cuts to get the economy going.
Right.
That's what the AFL-CIO used to do. Lane Kirkland was instrumental in helping President Reagan defeat communism. What has happened since then is that as the union movement has changed to a public sector movement, it's become white-collar and much more culturally liberal. So it's not just about big government. It's, the old hard hats of the 1960s who supported, the war in Vietnam. That's completely gone. The union movement is completely different today, not just fiscally, but also culturally.
I didn't know this until I heard this yesterday. There is no union for federal government employees. So while the president is talking about it being a right for the state workers of Wisconsin, it's apparently not for federal workers there in his own town.
Yes, and see, here's the thing. Let me explain, because people get this confused all the time. In 1962, President Kennedy did sign an order allowing federal workers to organize and to join unions. What he did not allow them to do is to collectively bargain. And so, the crucial the essential fact of any union is that it can bargain for wages and benefits. If it can't do that, then it's basically like a professional association that can maybe lobby, which is what the federal workers, groups can do, but they can't sit across the table and bargain collectively. So when the president said that what Wisconsin was doing was an assault on unions, he neglected to say that when he imposed a wage freeze on federal workers, remember when he did that in January? Right? That was something that no governor in a state that has collective bargaining could do, because across the country we've seen this throughout the recession. Mayors and governors who try to stop a growth in government and simply freeze wages the way you were seeing wages frozen in a lot of private companies. You can't do that under collective bargaining. So the president does have more powers than the governor of Wisconsin has to manage his workforce.
You're suggesting there's hypocrisy in politics. I am shocked, sir.
It's either hypocrisy or he didn't understand.
I doubt that's the case.
He's a pretty smart guy. Speaking of smart guys, Stephen Malang is on our line. He's one of our favorite writers and economic thinkers. Listen, I want to hit the rewind button just for a moment, because sure. I think we touched very briefly on an incredibly important point, which goes to the fact that there are union guys all over the place saying the governor of Wisconsin's trying to bust all unions, when he's not at all. Private unions, private worker unions, private enterprise unions are in a partnership that often seems a little adversarial with the company to grow and profit and get bigger and have higher pay and hire more people.
Well, and the battle's over who gets the money, the employees or the fat cats at the top, or does the consumer pay a higher price? But you can understand the, give and take there.
It's a semi-adversarial relationship, but it balances, and it's pursuing one goal, and that is profitability and sharing that profit. Whereas a public employee union is a very, very different beast indeed. There is no such balancing factor. It is the employees, the executives, whatever, wanting to get as much as they possibly can, and the balancing factor is merely the patience of the taxpayers compelled at gunpoint to pay their taxes.
Don't say at gunpoint. That's what caused that woman in Arizona to get shot.
Shut up. It's a very different thing, is it not?
Yeah, actually, you've used a few phrases that are really crucial here. First of all, in the private sector, you call it a balancing act, and it is a balancing act. And what happens if it goes out of balance? What happens, for instance, if a management cuts a bad deal, a deal that's too expensive? Well, a private company that makes a mistake can go out of business and will go out of business. They often do go out of business unless you're General Motors. You get bailed out by the federal government.
Yeah, putting that aside.
Right, but putting that aside, one of the problems that taxpayers face is that government never goes out of business. It can't go out of business. So when government makes a bad deal, or if politicians make a favorable deal for their reelection but not a favorable deal for taxpayers, government doesn't go bust and bankrupt and go out of business. Instead, what happens is government turns around and turns to taxpayers, as they just did in Illinois, and they raised their taxes 66% because that was basically the, quote, emergency solution. So that's a crucial difference. In the private sector, you not only have more of an adversarial circumstance, but if you miscalculate, you go out of business. But government, when they miscalculate, they just turn to the taxpayers. Bankruptcy court.
Why are you laying off firefighters and teachers?
Right. Well, and here's the thing. People are talking a lot about bankruptcy. Well, you've seen bankruptcy with Vallejo in California. When a municipality goes into bankruptcy, in the end, they might cut some employee benefits and some salaries, but bankruptcy, they're going to turn to the taxpayer and say, you got to pay up too. And so that's the risk the taxpayers face. That's kind of the dysfunctionality of collective bargaining in the public sector. And that was why the Wagner Act in 1935, which guaranteed collective bargaining in the private sector, purposely excluded the public sector.
Stephen Malang on the line. Stephen, how's your schedule? Can you hang on another few minutes?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, yeah, let's come back and talk more to Stephen Malang of the book Shakedown, the Continuing Conspiracy Against the American Taxpayer.
Yeah, this is interesting. I mean, as you follow this whole Wisconsin story, you've got to work to try to get the truth out of this story.
There's a lot of truth smearing. There's a lot of words being used not quite right to try to get the point across. See through it.
Stay with us. You're listening to The Armstrong and Getty Show.
Let's understand this battle that's going on. Taxpayers versus public unions? Is that the fight? Shakedown's the book. Stephen Malanga next.
9 o'clock.